The story is told of a hitchhiker walking through a lane in a country that shall be nameless, otherwise I'll be accused of racism. And he sees ahead of him a horse and a cart. And as he gets level with the horse and the cart, the man in charge of the horse says, "Would you like a lift?" And he says, "Yes, I would." So he gets onto the back of the cart, and as they're going along, the man in charge of the horse realises that his hitchhiker friend still has that heavy load over his shoulder. And he says to him, "Just put the load down on the cart." And the hitchhiker replies, "No, it's good of you to take me. I can't ask you to take the load as well." Well, I guess we all know something about burdens. Could be the health, could be our decreasing ability, could be our increasing age, could be our family, and one that strikes most of us is the DOB, the date of birth. And I want to talk to you just for a few moments today about burdens. And first of all, the burden we must carry alone. Each of you has to carry your own load. One of the things that I've learnt in my ministry over many years has been that people who come to you with problems or wanting to talk to you, rarely is the presenting problem the real problem. I remember a young man who worked in the advocate office just across from the church in Burnie, and he rang me up one day and said, "I'd like to speak to you at lunchtime." And so he came into my office and he said, "I want to know whether I should move from Burnie to Brisbane." Well, I thought of the things I could have said to him. I could have said to him, "Well, you've got to put up with their terrible climate in wintertime. And the Premier is Jelke Peterson. That's probably something that you might like to think about." And then after we'd been talking for about 5 minutes, he said to me, "And then, of course, there's my girlfriend." So what he wanted really to talk about was how did he break off a relationship with his girlfriend, not about whether he should move to Brisbane or not. So nowhere in the Bible does it say that some will have burdens and some will not. Remember the sermon from years ago, the ship that carries Jesus is as likely to be tossed by storms as any other. Some burdens are heavy, some are light, some are obvious, some are hidden, and behind many an apparently prosperous life, there is anxiety and fear. Behind many a smiling face, there is a broken heart. The metaphor here is that of a soldier with a group marching through the heated day, and at the end of the day, exhausted, they arrive at the camp. Halt! And then everyone is now responsible for his own kit, even if someone has helped him carry the load during the march. Jesus had his time when he had to face the burden of life on his own. Jerusalem, Gethsemane, Golgotha. He was always a few steps ahead of the disciples, but way, way ahead of them when it came to the end. When I was a very young boy, I used to recite a poem for church concerts. It was called Borrowed. And the line that kept on coming through was this line: "The crown that he wore and the cross that he bore were his own." And all of us know something of that kind of responsibility. You may not be responsible for the equipment you've been given, but you are responsible for what you do with it. When we are faced with decisions, ultimately, we are the ones that have to make that decision. No one can believe for you, and no one can take your place in God's plan for you. Only recently we've marked the anniversary of D-Day. It was delayed once because of weather reports. The fate of Europe, perhaps the fate of the world, seemed to hang on the strength of the wind. Eisenhower met with the chiefs, but finally it was his decision. We sail tomorrow. And Harry Truman, it said, had on his desk the phrase, "The buck stops here." Every one of you must carry his own load. But then Paul says, help one another's burdens, for this is the way you will obey the law of Christ. It's the word used for the freight on a ship, the heavy load that is so crushing that no one can carry it for long without help. Now, we all know of situations where we need someone to help us. My daughter once worked for Centrelink, and they had a man there who had lost an arm in an accident. For his birthday, they gave him different gifts: skipping rope, chest expander. They'd take him up to the pool and throw him in and watch him swim around in circles. Perhaps the best one was when Ringwood was playing Camberwell in a game of footy, and on the Friday night my daughter said to Dave, "Are you playing on Sunday?" And he said, "No." He said, "I'll be goal umpire and they won't kick many goals up my end." There are some things where we need help if we are to carry on. In Galatians, it's the responsibility of the fellowship to restore the victim of a sudden surprise attack of sin. Gently, with compassion, because the church is the reconciling fellowship. The first question in the Bible, am I my brother's keeper? Cain expected the answer to be no, and the answer given is yes. We dare not be indifferent to the needs of others. Many years ago, more than I like to think because it was on my 21st birthday, I was given a book by a preacher called Herbert H. Farmer. And in it he tells the story. He says, "Here are some words from a letter I once received from a friend. Without the forgiveness of God, life to one who is being cleansed and sensitised by Christ, and his eyes open to the true values of life, becomes even more a burden than it would otherwise." And he talks of an occasion when a half-blind woman with thick lensed glasses selling cottons and led by a thin, pasty-faced little lad came to the door. I can make many excuses for myself. I was tired, it was late, there'd been a stream of such people. I cut short a tale of domestic woe with a very sharp no. The lad said, "Come away, Mum," and led her away, and I saw her thin, round back and the wisps of lank grey hair hanging untidily over her faded, threadbare coat. At the gate she paused while the boy opened it and gave a deep sigh, and the boy turned and gave me a look which is near as hatred as anything I've ever seen. Undo what I have done, I've prayed often. I think I understand why Christianity talks so much about forgiveness. Once Christ begins to make sensitive the soul, most of the times we thought were tolerable begin to be intolerable and shocking. One of the things I discovered in my years of ministry is that there is a tendency among people to try and blame the victim. I remember a man saying to me when I spoke at his service club, "John, some of us began life with difficulties. Why don't these people help themselves? You know, why don't they pull themselves up by their shoelaces? But what if you don't have any shoes?" And so in our work with Aborigines and the homeless and boat people and widows and orphans and the unemployed and the underprivileged, you can complete the list. We find a tendency to say it must be their fault. And Paul says, help carry one another's burdens. It's not an optional extra. This is the law of Christ. And finally, cast your burden on the Lord. The load that falls to our lot that can press down and become a burden of care. No one is called to bear life's responsibilities on her own or his own. But when the psalmist met with this difficulty, how did he deal with it? How did Paul deal with his thorn in the flesh? Run away? No. Cast your burden on the Lord. Well, that's a cop-out, isn't it, really? Avoid your responsibility. Let God take care of it. And in that film, Chariots of Fire, we have the poem Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. The Christian response is, cast your burden upon the Lord and he will sustain you. Put his strength under your strength. Add his wisdom to your wisdom. Add his patience and compassion to yours. Matthew's Gospel has those words that we so often quote. Come unto me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take your yoke upon me and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Take these words away with you, for there are people whose beliefs generate fear and care rather than peace and joy. These words, faith in Jesus should be a burden as sails are a burden to a yacht, a burden as wings are to a bird. For Jesus came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Amen.